Case 1. Cheyenne Harris, August 30th, 2017, Chickasaw County, Iowa. There are moments in a criminal investigation when the evidence discovered inside a home is so deeply troubling that even the most experienced law enforcement officers struggle to process what they are seeing. August 30th, 2017, was one of those moments. On that sweltering summer afternoon, first responders were called to a residence in Alta Vista, Iowa, a quiet, rural community in Chickasaw County where neighbors knew one another by name and where, on the surface, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But what investigators found inside that home would shake the entire state of Iowa and ignite a legal battle that would take nearly 2 years to reach its conclusion. Alta Vista is a small town, the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked and where a new family moving into the neighborhood is noticed almost immediately. Cheyenne Harris, 21 years old at the time, had been living in the area with her boyfriend, Carson Cohn. Together, they had a son, a baby boy named Sterling Cohn, just 4 months old, born in the spring of 2017. To anyone who glanced at the young family from the outside, Sterling appeared to be a child with his whole life ahead of him. He was small. He was new to the world. He was completely dependent on the 2 adults responsible for his care. On that August afternoon, when emergency responders entered the home and found Sterling in a baby swing in one of the bedrooms, the scene they encountered was one they would later describe in court testimony as among the most distressing they had ever witnessed in their careers. The room was hot, dangerously so, with no air circulation and no evidence that the environment had been maintained in any way suitable for an infant. Sterling was not moving. Sterling was not breathing. And the physical condition in which he was found told a story of neglect so severe, so prolonged, and so complete that investigators, medical examiners, and prosecutors would spend the following months carefully reconstructing exactly what had happened inside that home during the weeks leading up to August 30th. The Chickasaw County Sheriff's Office, working alongside the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, immediately secured the residence and launched a full criminal investigation. Sterling Cohn was pronounced deceased at the scene. He was 4 months old. What the subsequent medical examination revealed formed the foundation of the criminal case that would follow. The Iowa State Medical Examiner's Office determined that Sterling had not received adequate nutrition or hydration for an extended period of time. His little body, still in the early months of development when every feeding, every ounce of care is critical to survival, had been subjected to a prolonged failure of basic parental responsibility. The official cause of death was determined to be malnutrition, dehydration, and an infection consistent with conditions that develop when an infant is left in an unchanged and unsanitary state for days. The medical examiner's findings indicated that Sterling's condition had not developed overnight. This was not a single moment of neglect. This was a pattern, a sustained, ongoing failure of care that stretched across the final days of his short life, during which he would have shown clear signs of distress, weight loss, and declining health that neither of the adults in that home chose to address by seeking medical attention. Investigators also determined, through forensic evidence gathered at the scene, that Sterling had been left in the baby swing for an extended period without the basic care that every infant requires. The physical evidence found on his person, evidence that the medical examiner described in clinical terms that would later be presented to a jury, indicated that he had not received a diaper change for an estimated 9 to 14 days. The resulting condition of his skin and the presence of an E. coli infection in his system told investigators everything they needed to know about the environment in which this baby had spent the final days of his life. Cheyenne Harris and Carson Cohn were both taken into custody. Both were charged with first-degree murder under Iowa law, which requires the prosecution to prove that the defendant acted with deliberate premeditation, or, in cases of child endangerment resulting in death, that the defendant's actions demonstrated a knowing and willful disregard for the life of a dependent child. Iowa Code Section 707.1 defines first-degree murder to include the willful, deliberate, and premeditated taking of a life. Prosecutors in Chickasaw County built their case around the argument that the failure to provide Sterling with basic food, hydration, sanitation, and medical care over a period of days, with full awareness of his deteriorating condition, met that legal threshold. The case drew significant attention across Iowa and beyond. Child welfare advocates, legal scholars, and community members followed every development closely. The central question before the court was not simply what had happened to Sterling. The physical evidence answered that with devastating clarity, but rather what each of the two adults in that home had known, when they had known it, and what choices they had made in the face of that knowledge. Harris's trial took place in Chickasaw County District Court. Prosecutors presented the medical examiner's findings, forensic evidence from the residents, testimony from first responders, and digital evidence that painted a picture of daily life in that home during the weeks preceding Sterling's passing. The defense challenged the degree of Harris's culpability, raising questions about the nature of the parental responsibilities shared between her and Cohn. But the evidence presented to the jury was extensive, detailed, and by all accounts, deeply impactful. On February 19, 2019, the jury returned its verdict. Cheyenne Harris was found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of her son, Sterling Cohn. The Honorable Judge Linda Fangman sentenced Harris to life in prison without the possibility of parole, the mandatory sentence under Iowa law for a first-degree murder conviction. Carson Cohn, tried separately, was also convicted and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Sterling Cohn lived for 4 months. He never had the opportunity to grow, to learn, to experience the world that was waiting for him. He was entirely dependent on the adults who were legally and morally responsible for his well-being. The Iowa court system ensured that those responsible for his passing were held fully accountable under the law. In the years since the conviction, the case has been cited by Iowa child welfare advocates as a painful reminder of the importance of community vigilance, early intervention programs, and robust support systems for young families. Iowa's Department of Human Services has referenced cases like Sterling's in its ongoing efforts to strengthen child welfare protocols statewide. Sterling's brief life and the tragedy of his passing have not been forgotten by those who fight every day to ensure that no child in Iowa suffers the same fate. Justice, in this case, came in the form of 2 life sentences, a legal acknowledgement that Sterling Cohn's life mattered, that his suffering was real, and that the law of the state of Iowa would not look away from what happened in that Alta Vista home on August 30, 2017. If you or someone you know has concerns about the welfare of a child, please contact the Iowa Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-222-SAFE. That is 1-800-222-7233. Reports can be made anonymously, and every call has the potential to save a life. If this case moved you, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment below. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Case 2. Nicole Finn, October 25, 2016, Polk County, Iowa. There is a particular kind of pain that settles over a community when it discovers that cruelty was not happening somewhere distant, somewhere abstract, but in a house on a quiet street. A house that looked, from the outside, entirely ordinary. West Des Moines, Iowa, is a city of neighborhoods, of school buses and soccer practices, and neighbors who wave from their driveways on Saturday mornings. It is not a city where people expect to encounter a story like the one that emerged from a modest residence in the fall of 2016. And yet, on October 25th of that year, a 16-year-old girl named Natalie Finn passed away inside that home. And what investigators subsequently uncovered about the conditions in which Natalie and her siblings had been living for years would become one of the most significant child welfare cases in Iowa's modern history. Nicole Finn was 40 years old at the time. She and her ex-husband, Joseph Finn, had adopted several children over the years, a decision that, in the eyes of the law and the community, carried with it a profound and legally binding responsibility to provide those children with safety, stability, love, and care. Natalie Finn was one of those children. She had come into the Finn household as a young girl, full of the ordinary hopes and needs that every child carries. By the time she reached the age of 16, however, the life she was living inside the Finn home bore no resemblance to anything that could be described as a childhood. When emergency medical personnel responded to a call at the West Des Moines residence on October 25, 2016, they found Natalie Finn in a state of extreme physical deterioration. She was rushed to a local hospital, where medical staff immediately recognized the severity of her condition. Natalie was in cardiac arrest. She weighed 85 pounds. She was 16 years old and stood at a height that, at a medically appropriate weight, should have placed her well above 100 pounds. The attending physicians who attempted to save her life noted in their records that her physical condition was consistent with prolonged, severe malnutrition, the kind that develops not over weeks, but over months and years of inadequate nutrition. Natalie Finn did not survive. She passed away on October 25, 2016, and the cause of her death was officially determined to be cardiac arrest secondary to starvation. The investigation that followed was conducted by West Des Moines Police, the Polk County Sheriff's Office, and the Iowa Department of Human Services. What they found when they fully examined the circumstances of Natalie's life and the lives of her siblings still living in the home was a situation that multiple investigators would later describe in court proceedings as among the most troubling they had encountered in their professional careers. Natalie and at least two of her siblings, also adopted, had been confined to a single room in the residence for extended periods. That room had been stripped of its standard furnishings. There was no bed. There was no carpet. The floor was covered in linoleum, and investigators documented evidence that the floor had been soaked in human and animal waste, left uncleaned, creating an environment that was not only psychologically damaging, but physically dangerous to the children forced to live within it. The children had been denied regular access to meals. They had been denied regular access to bathroom facilities. They had been kept in a state of effective isolation, cut off from the outside world, from their schools, and from any adult who might have recognized their suffering and intervened. Investigators also uncovered digital communications in which Nicole Finn had referred to her adopted children in terms that reflected not parental concern, but contempt. In text messages exchanged with Joseph Finn, who lived separately from Nicole at the time of Natalie's passing, Nicole described the children in deeply dismissive language, communications that prosecutors would later present as evidence of the mindset that had governed her treatment of the children in her care. The Department of Human Services investigation revealed a deeply troubling secondary dimension to the case. Iowa DHS had received prior reports related to the Finn household. The question of why those reports had not resulted in earlier intervention became a matter of significant public scrutiny. An independent ombudsman's investigation, completed in the months following Nicole Finn's arrest, produced a report of approximately 160 pages examining the systemic failures that had allowed Natalie and her siblings to remain in conditions of severe neglect without effective intervention. That report led to significant policy discussions within Iowa's Child Protective Services infrastructure and became a touchstone document for advocates pushing for stronger oversight protocols. Nicole Finn was charged by the Polk County Attorney's Office with 1 count of first-degree murder in connection with Natalie's passing and 3 counts of first-degree kidnapping in connection with the unlawful confinement of her other children. Under Iowa law, kidnapping in the first degree involves the confinement of a person in a manner that exposes them to serious harm, a legal standard that prosecutors argued was clearly met by the conditions in which the Finn children had been held. The trial in Polk County District Court attracted statewide and national media attention. Prosecutors presented medical evidence, forensic documentation of the conditions inside the home, the digital communications between Nicole and Joseph Finn, and testimony from child welfare professionals and medical experts. The defense presented arguments focused on Nicole Finn's mental state and sought to contextualize her behavior within a framework of psychological dysfunction. The jury considered the evidence carefully. In December of 2017, Nicole Finn was found guilty on all counts: first-degree murder in the death of Natalie Finn and 3 counts of first-degree kidnapping. On January 26, 2018, Polk County District Judge Karen Romano sentenced Nicole Finn to 3 consecutive life terms in prison, plus an additional 30 years. She will not be eligible for parole. Joseph Finn, tried separately on charges of child endangerment, was also convicted and sentenced to prison. Natalie Finn was 16 years old. She had her entire life in front of her. She had survived every year of her childhood within a system that was supposed to protect her, only to pass away in circumstances that should never have been allowed to develop. Her siblings survived and, following the investigation, were placed in protective care. The Iowa legislature, in the wake of the case, took up several pieces of legislation aimed at strengthening the state's child welfare monitoring systems. Natalie's name has been invoked repeatedly in those legislative discussions, A reminder that behind every policy debate, there is a real child whose life depended on whether the system functioned as it was designed to. Nicole Finn will spend the rest of her life in the custody of the Iowa Department of Corrections. The law of the state of Iowa, the Polk County District Court, and the jury of her peers ensured that Natalie Finn's passing did not go unanswered. If this case resonated with you, please like this video, drop a comment. Every subscription helps us honor the victims in these stories. Case 3. Abby Lynn Amundson, July 7, 2024, Polk County, Iowa. Not every case that defines a community's relationship with loss and accountability begins with a long investigation or a mystery that takes years to unravel. Some cases arrive without warning. A single moment, a single decision, a single action whose consequences cannot be undone. The case of Abby Lynn Amundson is precisely that kind of story. It is a story about a Sunday afternoon in July, about a 10-year-old boy named Maxwell who was riding in the back seat of his mother's vehicle, and about the chain of events that began when Amundson chose to operate a motor vehicle while she was profoundly impaired, a decision that ended her son's life and set in motion a legal process that would conclude 18 months later with a sentence handed down in a Polk County courtroom. July 7, 2024, was a summer Sunday in Ankeny, Iowa, a growing city in Polk County, located just north of Des Moines, known for its strong schools, its family neighborhoods, and its sense of community. On that afternoon, Abby Lynn Amundson, then 34 years old, was behind the wheel of her vehicle traveling on Northwest Fisher Lane. Her son Maxwell Henry Amundson, 10 years old, was in the back seat. Ankeny Police Department officers responded to the scene of a head-on collision on Northwest Fisher Lane that afternoon. The investigation that followed, conducted by Ankeny PD in coordination with the Polk County Attorney's Office, established through forensic and toxicological evidence that Amundson had been operating her vehicle while under the influence of methamphetamine at the time of the crash. The toxicological analysis of her blood draw, completed following the collision, confirmed the presence of methamphetamine in her system at a level consistent with active impairment. The collision occurred when Amundson's vehicle crossed the center line of Northwest Fisher Lane and struck an oncoming SUV in a head-on impact. The force of the collision was severe. Maxwell Henry Amundson, seated in the back of his mother's vehicle, sustained injuries in the crash that were ultimately not survivable. He was transported to a medical facility where, despite the efforts of medical staff, he did not recover. Maxwell Henry Amundson passed away as a result of the injuries he sustained in the crash on Northwest Fisher Lane. He was 10 years old. The other vehicle involved in the collision also carried a child passenger. That child sustained injuries described as minor, and both the driver and child passenger of the second vehicle survived. The Polk County Attorney's Office filed criminal charges against Abby Lynn Amundson that reflected the full weight of what the evidence showed had occurred on that Sunday afternoon. She was charged with vehicular homicide by operating while intoxicated, a Class B felony under Iowa Code Section 707.6a, as well as a charge of child endangerment in connection with Maxwell's presence in the vehicle while Amundson was impaired. The vehicular homicide charge carries a maximum sentence of 25 years in Iowa. The case proceeded through Polk County District Court over the following months. The evidence against Amundson was extensive. Toxicological confirmation of methamphetamine impairment, physical accident reconstruction establishing that her vehicle had crossed the center line, and the coroner's findings regarding the cause of Maxwell's death. The prosecution argued that Amundson had made a knowing and deliberate choice to place herself behind the wheel of a vehicle while actively impaired, a choice that directly caused the death of her own son. Abby Lynn Amundson entered a guilty plea to the charges. The Polk County District Court scheduled the sentencing hearing for late 2025. On December 5, 2025, Abby Lynn Amundson appeared before Polk County District Court for sentencing. The hearing was attended by members of Maxwell's family, who had prepared statements addressing the court about the impact of his passing on their lives. Those statements, delivered in the courtroom that December morning, reflected the grief that had settled over everyone who had known Maxwell, a 10-year-old boy described by those who loved him as bright, energetic, and full of the ordinary, irreplaceable joy that children carry with them through the world. The court sentenced Abby Lynn Amundson to 25 years in prison. She was also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $150,000 to Maxwell's estate, a financial acknowledgement, in the language of the law, of the life that had been taken. Maxwell Henry Amenson was 10 years old. He had done nothing wrong. He had been a passenger, a child in the back seat, entirely dependent on the judgment of the adult responsible for his safety. That adult had chosen, on the morning of July 7, 2024, to drive while impaired. That choice cost Maxwell his life. The Polk County District Court's sentence of 25 years in prison stands as the legal system's answer to what happened on Northwest Fisher Lane on that summer Sunday. The case has since been referenced by Iowa substance abuse prevention advocates and child safety organizations as a reminder of the irreversible consequences of impaired driving and of the particular responsibility that parents bear when their children are in their care. If you found this case important, please like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments. Your engagement keeps this channel going and helps us tell these stories. Case 4, Taylor Blaha, November 16, 2022, Webster County, Iowa. There are cases in the Iowa court record that challenge even the most experienced legal professionals to find language adequate to the gravity of what occurred. The case of Taylor Blaha, originating in Webster County in November of 2022, is one of those cases. It is a case that involves the passing of a newborn child, a child who lived for only the briefest of moments, and a sequence of decisions made by her mother in the hours immediately following her birth that would ultimately lead to a second-degree murder conviction and a 50-year prison sentence. Fort Dodge, Iowa, is the county seat of Webster County, a mid-sized Iowa city with a history rooted in agriculture and manufacturing, situated along the Des Moines River in the north-central part of the state. It was in the Fort Dodge area that Taylor Blaha, then in her 20s, was living in November of 2022. She had concealed her pregnancy, a fact that would later become significant to investigators and prosecutors as they worked to understand the full context of what occurred on the evening of November 16, 2022. On that evening, Blaha gave birth at home. The birth occurred in a bathtub. The baby, a girl, was born alive. Those facts were established through the subsequent investigation and through statements that Blaha herself made to law enforcement in the days that followed. Investigators from the Webster County Sheriff's Office and the Fort Dodge Police Department, working in coordination with the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, pieced together the events of that night through forensic evidence, witness accounts, and Blaha's own admissions. According to the information established in court proceedings and confirmed through Blaha's guilty plea, the newborn was alive at the time of birth. Blaha, in statements provided to investigators, acknowledged that she and Brandon Thoma, the baby's father, made the decision in the immediate aftermath of the birth to end the infant's life. The stated motivation, as reflected in the record of those proceedings, was a fear that the baby's cries would draw attention that Blaha and Thoma sought to avoid because of the presence of methamphetamine in their environment and the anticipated involvement of law enforcement and child protective services that would follow the discovery of a newborn in their home. The infant's body was subsequently concealed. Despite extensive investigative efforts by Webster County law enforcement and the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, efforts that included searches of multiple locations in the Fort Dodge area, Kayleen Lee Blaha's remains have never been recovered. The absence of the child's body presented a significant legal challenge to the prosecution, but the investigation, including Blaha's admissions and the corroborating evidence gathered by investigators, was sufficient to support the charges that followed. Taylor Blaha was charged with second-degree murder under Iowa law. She was also charged with charges related to child endangerment and the concealment of the infant's remains. Brandon Thoma faced related charges in connection with the same events. In August of 2023, Taylor Blaha entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder in Webster County District Court. The decision to plead guilty spared the court a contested trial but did not diminish the gravity of what the proceedings established. Webster County District Judge Angela Doyle presided over the sentencing hearing that followed. On the date of sentencing, statements were presented to the court reflecting the impact of the case on the broader community and on those who had worked the investigation. Taylor Blaha was sentenced to 50 years in prison in Webster County District Court, with a mandatory minimum of 35 years before eligibility for consideration of release. Brandon Thomas was separately prosecuted and also received a significant prison sentence in connection with the case. Kayleen Lee Blaha, the name given to her by investigators to honor her humanity and the reality of her brief existence, never had the opportunity to take more than her first breaths in this world. She will never be forgotten by those who worked to bring accountability for what happened to her in that Fort Dodge home. The Webster County District Court's sentence of 50 years reflects the seriousness with which Iowa's legal system regards the protection of the most vulnerable. Child advocacy organizations in Iowa have since pointed to cases like Kayleen's as a reminder of the importance of safe haven laws. Iowa's safe haven law, in effect since 2001, allows a parent to legally surrender a newborn to any hospital, fire station, or other designated location within 5 days of birth, no questions asked, with full legal immunity. That option existed on November 16, 2022. It was not taken. Please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who cares about these issues. These stories deserve to be heard. Case 5. Angela Johnson, 1993, Cerro Gordo County and Federal Court, Northern District of Iowa. Some cases do not begin with a single event. Some cases are the product of years of choices, years of associations, years of participation in a world built on violence and exploitation. The federal case against Angela Johnson is one of those stories. It is a case that spans a decade from the crimes themselves to their prosecution, that involves the machinery of a large-scale methamphetamine distribution network operating across northern Iowa, and that culminated in a federal courtroom verdict that made history, not for reasons that any civilized society would wish to celebrate, but for the devastating clarity it brought to the consequences of complicity in violence. Angela Johnson was a woman in her 30s living in the Mason City area of Cerro Gordo County, Iowa, in the early 1990s. She was in a romantic relationship with Dustin Honkin, a man who was, at the time, operating one of the most significant methamphetamine distribution networks in northern Iowa. Honkin was not merely a drug dealer. He was a man who had demonstrated, over the course of his criminal career, a willingness to employ extreme violence to protect his operation and silence those who posed a threat to it. The people who surrounded Honkin understood this, and Angela Johnson, the evidence at trial would establish, was among those who not only understood it, but actively participated in the acts of violence that defined the most lethal chapter of his criminal enterprise. The events that formed the core of the federal case against Angela Johnson took place in the summer and fall of 1993 in the Mason City area. At that time, Honkin had been arrested on federal drug charges and was awaiting trial. Two individuals, Greg Nicholson and Terry DeGius, had agreed to cooperate with federal investigators as government witnesses, a decision that in Honkin's world carried mortal consequences. Honkin, operating from within the criminal network even while facing federal charges, directed efforts to locate and permanently silence the two cooperating witnesses before they could testify. Angela Johnson's role in what followed was established through the evidence presented at trial and confirmed through subsequent federal court proceedings. Investigators determined that Johnson had been involved in the effort to locate the witnesses and their associates. Greg Nicholson had a girlfriend named Lori Duncan. Lori Duncan had two daughters, Amber Duncan, who was 6 years old, and Candy Duncan, who was 10. On the night they were lured from their home, all four individuals, Nicholson, Duncan, and the two girls, were taken to a location outside Mason City, where they were killed and their bodies buried in a shallow grave. Terry DeGius was located separately and also lost his life. The 5 victims, including 2 children, 6 and 10 years old, were buried in locations that would not be discovered for years. In the year 2000, construction in the Mason City area led to the discovery of the burial sites. The remains of the 5 victims were recovered, and the federal investigation into Honkin and Johnson was relaunched with the physical evidence needed to pursue prosecution. Both Honkin and Johnson were indicted on federal charges. Johnson's federal trial took place in the Northern District of Iowa. Federal prosecutors presented evidence establishing Johnson's participation in the events leading to the deaths of the 5 victims, including her role in facilitating access to the victims and her knowledge of what was to occur. The defense presented Johnson as a woman who had been manipulated and controlled by Honkin's influence over her. The jury considered the evidence over the course of the trial. In 2005, Angela Johnson was convicted on 5 counts of aiding and abetting murder in furtherance of a federal drug conspiracy. The jury returned its verdict and, in the sentencing phase, recommended the death penalty. Angela Johnson became the first woman sentenced to death by a United States federal jury since the 1950s, a historical designation that reflected the unprecedented nature of the verdict rather than any cause for commemoration. The years following her death sentence were marked by extensive federal appellate proceedings. In 2012, the United States Court of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit vacated Johnson's death sentence on the grounds of ineffective assistance of counsel during the penalty phase of her trial. The case was remanded for resentencing. In 2014, Angela Johnson was resentenced in federal court to life in prison without the possibility of parole, a sentence that the court determined appropriately reflected the gravity of her crimes and the lives that had been taken. Amber Duncan was 6 years old. Candy Duncan was 10. They were children who had done nothing to place themselves in harm's way. Children whose lives were taken as a consequence of their proximity to adults caught in the brutal logic of organized crime. The federal court system, across more than 2 decades of proceedings, ultimately ensured that Angela Johnson would spend the remainder of her life in federal custody, held accountable under the law for her role in what happened to those 5 people in 1993. Dustin Honkin was separately convicted and sentenced to death. He passed away while in federal custody in 2020. The case remains one of the most significant federal criminal prosecutions in Iowa's history, a stark and enduring reminder of the human cost of organized crime and the courage of the investigators, prosecutors, and federal agents who refused to let those 5 lives go unanswered. If this case opened your eyes to history you didn't know, please like this video, leave a comment, hit the notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. Case 6. Jaley Bush, January 27, 2025, Lee County, Iowa. The southern Iowa city of Keokuk sits at the confluence of the Des Moines and Mississippi rivers, a city with deep historical roots, a tight-knit community, and, like many small cities across the American heartland, a community that has not been immune to the challenges that come with substance use disorder and the devastation it can bring into the lives of families. On January 27, 2025, a call came into emergency services in Keokuk that would set in motion one of the most painful cases Lee County had seen in years, a case involving a 7-month-old boy named Ryland James Spores, and a series of events that began with parental incapacitation and ended with a young life lost. Ryland James Spores was born in the early summer of 2024. He was 7 months old on January 27, 2025. Like all infants, he was entirely dependent on the adult in his home to meet his every need, to feed him, to keep him safe, to be present and capable of responding to him when something went wrong. On the morning that emergency responders were called to the Keokuk residence where Ryland lived with his mother, Jaley Bush, and others, the situation they encountered was one that no emergency responder ever wants to find. Ryland was discovered unresponsive inside a trash can located beside a bed in the residence. He was headfirst in the container. He was not breathing. Emergency medical personnel responded immediately and transported the infant to the nearest medical facility, where staff worked to stabilize him. The injuries and physical condition identified by medical staff upon Ryland's arrival were consistent with positional asphyxia, a condition in which a person's position prevents normal breathing. Despite the medical team's efforts over the days that followed, Ryland James Spores did not recover. He passed away on February 5, 2025, 9 days after he was found. The Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, working with the Lee County Sheriff's Office and the Keokuk Police Department, conducted a thorough investigation into the circumstances surrounding Ryland's discovery and subsequent passing. That investigation included interviews with individuals present in the residence, a forensic examination of the scene, and a comprehensive toxicological analysis of Jaley Bush. Bush cooperated with investigators and provided statements in the course of the investigation. The information that emerged from both her statements and the toxicological analysis painted a clear picture of what had occurred in the Keokuk residence on the night of January 26th and into the early morning hours of January 27th. Bush had ingested both methamphetamine and Klonopin, a prescription benzodiazepine, before losing consciousness. The combined effect of those substances had rendered her completely incapacitated and entirely unable to respond to, monitor, or care for her 7-month-old son through the night and into the morning hours when he was found. The circumstances of Ryland's discovery, his position inside the trash can, his proximity to the bed where Bush had been sleeping, indicated that events had unfolded over the course of the night in a way that Ryland, 7 months old and physically incapable of extricating himself from any position into which he had been placed or had fallen, could not survive without adult intervention. That intervention never came, because the adult responsible for providing it was incapacitated. The Lee County Attorney's Office reviewed the full investigative record and, in November of 2025, filed formal criminal charges against Jaylee Bush. She was charged with child endangerment resulting in death, a Class B felony under Iowa Code Section 726.6, which, in cases where the child's death results from the endangerment, carries a maximum penalty of 25 years in prison. The charge reflects Iowa law's recognition that a parent's knowing act of becoming incapacitated through substance use while solely responsible for an infant constitutes a criminally reckless disregard for that child's safety. As of the time of this documentary's production, criminal proceedings against Jaylee Bush are ongoing in Lee County District Court. She faces a maximum of 25 years in prison if convicted on the child endangerment resulting in death charge. Ryland James Spores was 7 months old. He weighed, at 7 months, what every healthy, growing baby should weigh. He had every reason to expect that the world would be a safe place, that the adult in his home would be present, capable, and responsive. On the night of January 26, 2025, that expectation was not met. The Lee County legal system is now in the process of determining the full measure of accountability for what happened to him. Substance use disorder is a public health crisis that affects families across Iowa and across the country. For parents struggling with substance use, Iowa's Department of Human Services offers resources and referral services that can connect families with treatment options before tragedy occurs. No child should pay the price for a parent's untreated addiction. Help is available. If Ryland's story touched you, please like this video, leave a comment for this little boy. Your support means everything. Case 7. Michelle Kehoe, October 26, 2008, Winneshiek County, Iowa. There are cases in the annals of Iowa criminal history that, decades after the verdict, still carry the weight of disbelief. Cases so far outside the ordinary parameters of human behavior that communities continue, long after sentencing, to struggle with the question of how something like this could have happened. The case of Michelle Kehoe is one of those cases. It is a case involving a mother, 2 young sons, a remote stretch of rural Iowa road, and a crime scene that the Winneshiek County first responders who arrived on October 26, 2008, have never forgotten. Michelle Kehoe was a 33-year-old woman living in the Coralville area of Iowa in 2008. She was married, with 2 sons, Sean, who was 7 years old, and Seth, who was 2. On the surface, the Kehoe family presented no obvious signs to outsiders of the crisis that was unfolding beneath the surface of their daily life. Michelle Kehoe was described by acquaintances as a quiet, private woman, someone who did not draw attention to herself or her family, and who gave no outward indication that she was approaching a breaking point whose consequences would be catastrophic. On the morning of October 26, 2008, Michelle Kehoe placed her 2 sons in the family vehicle and drove from the Coralville area north toward Winneshiek County, a rural, heavily agricultural part of northeastern Iowa, known for its rolling hills, its small towns, and its quiet country roads. The drive would have taken several hours. During that time, Sean and Seth Kehoe sat in the vehicle with their mother, unaware of what she had planned for them when they reached their destination. The hunting knife that Michelle Kehoe had purchased in the weeks preceding October 26 was found at the scene. Investigators from the Winneshiek County Sheriff's Office, who were among the first to respond to what was initially reported as a roadside emergency, found the family vehicle parked on a remote rural road in Winneshiek County. Inside and near the vehicle, they found evidence of a scene that would require extensive forensic documentation and that would form the basis of one of the most significant criminal prosecutions in Winneshiek County's history. Seth Kehoe, 2 years old, had been subjected to a violent attack. He did not survive. Sean Kehoe, 7 years old, had also been subjected to an attack and had sustained severe injuries. Sean had been left inside the locked family vehicle, alone, overnight, in late October in northeastern Iowa, where he remained until his discovery by first responders the following morning. He was alive. He had survived the night through a combination of physical resilience and the kind of determination that 7-year-old children, in the most extreme circumstances, sometimes manage to find. Michelle Kehoe had also sustained injuries to her own throat. Investigators quickly determined that those injuries were self-inflicted as part of an attempt to stage the scene as an abduction or attack by an unknown perpetrator. In the immediate aftermath of the discovery, she provided investigators with a story about an unknown assailant, a narrative that the evidence at the scene did not support and that unraveled rapidly under the scrutiny of the Winneshiek County investigation. Sean Kehoe, once medically stabilized, cooperated with investigators to the extent that a 7-year-old survivor of such an experience could. His testimony, given by a child who had survived an attack by his own mother, spent a night locked in a vehicle in rural Iowa in late October, and then had to face a courtroom, became a central element of the prosecution's case. Michelle Kehoe was charged in Winneshiek County District Court with 1 count of first-degree murder in connection with Seth's passing and 1 count of attempted murder in connection with the attack on Sean. Iowa first-degree murder, as defined under Iowa Code Section 707.2, includes willful, deliberate, and premeditated acts resulting in death. The premeditated nature of the attack, evidenced by the prior purchase of the weapon, the deliberate drive to a remote location, and the attempt to stage a false crime scene, was central to the prosecution's first-degree murder theory. The trial of Michelle Kehoe in Winneshiek County District Court proceeded with extensive media coverage. The prosecution presented the forensic evidence from the scene, the medical examiner's findings, the investigation into the staged nature of the attack, the evidence of weapon purchase, and Sean's testimony. The defense raised arguments related to Kehoe's mental state, presenting evidence of psychological disturbance and arguing that her actions were the product of a severe mental health crisis rather than the kind of cold premeditation contemplated by the first-degree murder statute. On November 5, 2009, the jury returned its verdict. Michelle Kehoe was found guilty of first-degree murder in the death of Seth Kehoe and guilty of attempted murder in the assault on Sean. The Honorable Judge Laura Parrish sentenced Michelle Kehoe to life in prison without the possibility of parole for the first-degree murder conviction, plus an additional 25 years for the attempted murder of Sean. She is currently serving those sentences in the custody of the Iowa Department of Corrections. The Iowa Court of Appeals reviewed the conviction in December of 2019 and affirmed it in its entirety, upholding both the verdict and the sentence. Seth Kehoe was 2 years old. He trusted his mother completely, as 2-year-olds do, in the way that small children extend unconditional trust to the people who have cared for them since birth. That trust was not honored. Sean Kehoe survived, and the resilience he demonstrated, from the back of that locked vehicle on a cold October night in Winneshiek County to the witness stand in a courtroom in northeastern Iowa, is the kind of resilience that stays with everyone who hears this case. The Iowa court system delivered its verdict clearly and unequivocally. Seth's life mattered. Sean's survival and testimony mattered. And the life sentence entered against Michelle Kehoe in Winneshiek County District Court stands as Iowa's legal answer to what happened on that rural road on October 26, 2008. If this case affected you, please like this video, leave a comment below. We tell these stories because the victims deserve to be remembered. Case 8. Cindy Sue Elder, December 21, 1992/September 2025, Johnson County, Iowa. There is a particular category of criminal investigation that tests the patience, the persistence, and the technological capabilities of law enforcement in ways that few other case types do. These are the cases that are not solved in weeks or months, but in decades. The case of Cindy Sue Elder, originating in Iowa City, Iowa, in December of 1992, is among the most extraordinary examples of this category in Iowa's legal history. It is a case that lay dormant for nearly 3 decades, that was ultimately cracked not by a witness coming forward or a new piece of physical evidence discovered at the original scene, but by the extraordinary advances in forensic DNA technology that, in the 21st century, have given investigators tools that the officers who first stood at that Iowa City scene in 1992 could not have imagined. Iowa City is home to the University of Iowa, a city shaped by education, by the rhythms of academic life, and by the diverse community of students, faculty, and longtime residents who have made it one of Iowa's most distinctive communities. Johnson County, in which Iowa City sits, is served by the Iowa City Police Department and the Johnson County Sheriff's Office. On December 21, 1992, the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, a sanitation worker made a discovery in the Iowa City area that would remain unresolved for the next 28 years. A newborn baby boy, full-term, viable, and showing signs that he had been born alive, was found after having been placed in a trash receptacle in the Iowa City area and subsequently transported, with the ordinary refuse of that December day, to a landfill. The infant did not survive. Iowa City Police launched an investigation immediately, seeking to identify both the child and his mother. The baby was given the name Baby John Doe by investigators, a placeholder name that spoke to both the depth of his anonymity and the determination of those who worked the case to eventually give him something more. The investigation in 1992 was thorough for its time. Iowa City detectives canvassed the area, interviewed potential witnesses, and worked to identify any woman in the community who had recently given birth. One woman, a 26-year-old named Cindy Sue Elder, came to police attention in the course of those early inquiries. Investigators interviewed Elder, who reportedly told them that she had become pregnant, had concealed the pregnancy from everyone around her, had attempted to end the pregnancy on her own, and had ultimately given birth in a basement location. She acknowledged to investigators that the baby had been born alive, that she had heard him cry. She told them she had placed the infant in a bag and left him in trash receptacles near an apartment associated with her family. Despite this early investigative contact, the case against Elder in 1992 did not result in an arrest or prosecution. The evidentiary landscape available to prosecutors at that time was insufficient to support charges that would meet the legal burden of proof required for a first-degree murder prosecution. The case went cold. Iowa City Police retained the case file and the physical evidence, including biological samples from the infant, and the investigation was formally listed as inactive but never closed. For nearly 3 decades, Baby John Doe remained unidentified in the official record. The investigators who had worked the original case moved on, retired, and in some instances passed away. But the case file remained. And in the years following 2010, the field of forensic genealogy began to transform what was possible in cold case investigations across the United States. The Iowa City Police Department, in partnership with the Johnson County Attorney's Office, eventually engaged Othram Incorporated, a Texas-based forensic laboratory that specializes in genome sequencing and genetic genealogy, to apply advanced DNA analysis techniques to the biological evidence retained from the original 1992 investigation. The Othram analysis, completed in 2020, produced a result with a probability of identity exceeding 99.99%, linking the biological evidence from Baby John Doe to a genetic profile consistent with Cindy Sue Elder as the infant's mother. Armed with the Othram findings and additional investigative work conducted by Iowa City detectives, the Johnson County Attorney's Office pursued the case through the appropriate legal channels. Cindy Sue Elder, by this time no longer living in Iowa, was located in the state of Missouri. The extradition process was initiated, and in September of 2025, 32 years and 9 months after the infant she had placed in a trash bag on December 21, 1992, was found in an Iowa City landfill. Cindy Sue Elder was extradited back to Iowa and formally charged in Johnson County District Court with first-degree murder. The charge of first-degree murder, carrying a mandatory life sentence in Iowa upon conviction, reflects the prosecutorial determination that the evidence, including the statements Elder made to investigators in 1992 and the DNA analysis linking her to the infant, satisfies the legal standard for first-degree murder under Iowa Code Section 707.2. Elder has not yet been tried as of the date of this documentary's production. She is presumed innocent under the law until and unless a jury of her peers returns a verdict of guilt. Baby John Doe, whose remains were recovered from that Iowa City landfill 32 years ago, now has a case number, a defendant, and a legal process moving forward in his name. The investigators who refused to let the evidence deteriorate, the forensic scientists who developed the tools that made identification possible, and the Johnson County Attorney's Office that pursued prosecution decades after the original events, have collectively ensured that this infant's story does not end in silence. Iowa's Safe Haven Law, enacted in 2001, provides a legal, judgment-free pathway for parents in crisis to surrender a newborn safely. That option did not exist in December of 1992. But it exists today, and every parent in Iowa who finds themselves in a crisis pregnancy situation has a legal, safe, and anonymous option available to them at any hospital, fire station, or other designated location in the state. If this story of justice delayed but not denied moved you, please like this video, leave a comment. 32 years later, this baby's story is finally being told. Case 9, Megan Stodd, February 24, 2023, Warren County, Iowa. Warren County, Iowa, is a growing county immediately south of Polk County and the Des Moines metropolitan area. Its county seat is Indianola, and its communities, including the city of Norwalk, one of the fastest-growing cities in Iowa over the past decade, reflect the broader growth of the Des Moines suburbs as young families have moved outward from the urban core in search of more space and quieter neighborhoods. It was in Norwalk, in Warren County, that a case unfolded in the winter and spring of 2023 that would shake the community and eventually result in one of the most significant second-degree murder sentences in Warren County's recent history. Megan Stodd was a Norwalk resident in her 20s in February of 2023. She had been pregnant, and she had concealed that pregnancy from those around her, a pattern that investigators would later identify as central to understanding the choices she made in the hours and days following the birth of her child. On February 24, 2023, Megan Stodd gave birth at her Norwalk home. The baby, a boy, was born alive. What happened in the hours immediately following that birth was established through the subsequent investigation and through Stodd's eventual guilty plea, which provided the court with an admission of the essential facts of the case. According to the record established in Warren County District Court proceedings, Stodd placed the newborn in a box following his birth. She did not seek medical attention for herself or the baby. She did not contact emergency services. She did not call a family member or a friend for help. She did not take the infant to a hospital or a fire station, both of which would have been legally obligated, under Iowa's Safe Haven Law, to receive the child without question and without penalty to her. Instead, over the course of approximately 2 days during which the infant was alive, during which he cried, and during which Stodd acknowledged hearing those cries, she made no effort to provide the child with the care necessary for his survival. On February 26, 2023, 2 days after the birth, Stodd and her father, Rodney Stodd, placed the living infant in a plastic trash bag. They transported the bag to a rural road south of Norwalk, in Warren County, and left it in a roadside ditch. The infant, placed in a trash bag and left in a roadside ditch in late February in Iowa, in temperatures that, in Warren County on that date, would have been well below survival conditions for a newborn, did not survive. The infant's remains were not discovered for nearly 2 weeks. It was a tip, provided to law enforcement by a co-worker of Megan Stodd's who had noticed that Stodd was no longer visibly pregnant but had not mentioned anything about having a baby, that directed investigators to begin searching. Warren County Sheriff's Office deputies, following the tip and working with the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, conducted searches of rural areas south of Norwalk. On March 9, 2023, the infant's remains were recovered from the roadside ditch where Stodd and her father had left them on February 26. The investigation that followed was thorough and methodical. Phone records, witness statements, the co-worker's tip, forensic analysis of the scene, and the medical examiner's findings regarding the infant's cause of death collectively built a comprehensive evidentiary record. Megan Stodd and Rodney Stodd were both taken into custody and charged with second-degree murder under Iowa law. In July of 2024, Megan Stodd entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder in Warren County District Court. The plea acknowledged the essential facts of the case as established by the investigation. In the sentencing proceedings that followed in late 2025, Warren County District Court sentenced Megan Stodd to 50 years in prison, with a mandatory minimum of 35 years before any consideration of release. Rodney Stodd, convicted separately, received a sentence of 50 years as well. The infant, who was born in Norwalk on February 24, 2023, and whose brief life ended in a roadside ditch south of his birthplace, has been given a name in the court record, a name that reflects the effort of the Warren County legal system to acknowledge his humanity and the reality of his existence, however brief. His passing was not invisible. His story was not buried. A co-worker's observation, a law enforcement investigation, and a Warren County District Court verdict ensured that. Iowa's safe haven law exists precisely for situations like the one Megan Stodd found herself in on February 24, 2023. Any hospital, any fire station, any designated safe haven location in Iowa would have accepted that infant, no questions asked, with full legal immunity for the parent surrendering him. That option was not taken. The Warren County court system has answered that choice with a 50-year sentence. If this case matters to you, please like the video, share it with someone. Your comments and subscriptions help us keep telling these stories. Case 10, Sydney Schneiderman, September 10, 2023, Lyon County, Iowa. The final case in this documentary brings us to the far northwest corner of Iowa, to Lyon County, a rural county that borders both Minnesota to the north and South Dakota to the west, home to small agricultural communities and the county seat of Rock Rapids. It is not a county where first-degree murder charges are filed frequently. It is not a county that has often found itself at the center of a major criminal investigation. But beginning in September of 2023 and culminating in an arrest in August of 2024, Lyon County became the focal point of a case that has disturbed medical professionals, law enforcement, and child safety advocates across Iowa and beyond. A case involving a 6-week-old boy named Walker J. Schneiderman and the catastrophic injuries that ended his short life. Walker J. Schneiderman was born on August 16, 2023, in the Little Rock, Iowa, area of Lyon County. He was a first child, a newborn entering the world in a rural Iowa community, carried home from the hospital to begin the ordinary, extraordinary business of growing up. He was 6 weeks old on September 10, 2023, when his mother, Sydney Schneiderman, brought him to the emergency room of a local medical facility, telling staff that the infant had gone limp while in his father's arms. The emergency medical response to Walker's presentation was immediate. The severity of his injuries was apparent to the medical team within a short time of his arrival. Walker was stabilized sufficiently to be airlifted to Sanford Children's Hospital in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, the regional pediatric trauma center serving the northwest Iowa and eastern South Dakota area, where a specialized team of pediatric medical professionals conducted a comprehensive evaluation of his condition. What that evaluation found was documented in the medical records that would later form a central component of the criminal investigation. Walker J. Schneiderman had sustained a severe traumatic brain injury. Imaging studies revealed a subdural hematoma, bleeding between the brain and the skull, as well as significant brain swelling consistent with severe head trauma. Ophthalmological examination revealed bilateral retinal hemorrhages, hemorrhaging inside both eyes, which pediatric medical experts identified as a finding strongly associated with traumatic injury of a specific and recognizable type. Additionally, radiological imaging revealed the presence of rib fractures that were in various stages of healing, injuries that had not been caused by the incident that brought Walker to the emergency room on September 10th, but by prior events, indicating a pattern of physical harm over a period of time preceding the acute crisis. Walker J. Schneiderman did not recover from his injuries. He passed away on September 25, 2023, at Sanford Children's Hospital. He was 6 weeks and 9 days old. The investigation that followed Walker's passing was conducted by the Lyon County Sheriff's Office, the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, and law enforcement agencies working in coordination across the jurisdictions involved. The investigative process was methodical and comprehensive, as befitting a case in which the primary physical evidence was medical and in which the key witnesses were the medical professionals who had treated Walker and the adults who had been present in the home during his short life. Among the most significant pieces of evidence gathered in the course of the investigation was digital evidence recovered from Sydney Schneiderman's mobile phone. Investigators documented that, on a date approximately 3 days before Schneiderman brought Walker to the emergency room on September 10th, approximately September 7th, 2023, the phone search history contained queries relating to abusive head trauma in infants. Screenshots of those searches had been sent from Schneiderman's phone to her husband's phone. The significance of that digital evidence, its presence in the investigation record, was not lost on the investigators who reviewed it, nor on the prosecutors who subsequently evaluated the case. The Lyon County Attorney's Office, working with the Iowa Attorney General's Office and consulting with medical experts in pediatric trauma, evaluated the full body of evidence over the months following Walker's passing. That process took time, as thorough homicide investigations involving infant victims and complex medical evidence appropriately do. On August 31st, 2024, approximately 11 months after Walker's passing, Sydney Schneiderman was arrested. She was charged by Lyon County District Court with first-degree murder and child endangerment resulting in death. She was taken into custody and held on a bond of $1 million. Her initial court appearance took place in Lyon County District Court in Rock Rapids. As of the time of this documentary's production, legal proceedings in the case are ongoing. Sydney Schneiderman is presumed innocent under Iowa law until and unless a jury of her peers returns a verdict of guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Walker J. Schneiderman was 6 weeks old. He had been alive for 40 days. In those 40 days, he had never had the opportunity to smile in response to a familiar voice, to track a moving object with his eyes, to sleep in the warmth and safety that every newborn has the right to expect. The medical evidence gathered at Sanford Children's Hospital told a story about those 40 days that no parent should ever be responsible for. The Lyon County legal system is now in the process of determining the full truth of what happened to Walker and of delivering the accountability that his brief life demands. If you are a parent, a caregiver, or a family member concerned about the well-being of a child, please do not hesitate to contact the Iowa Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-222-7233. Reports are confidential. Every call matters. Every child deserves protection. If Walker's story moved you, if any of the cases in this documentary have stayed with you, please like this video, leave a comment below, hit that notification bell so you are always the first to know when a new documentary goes live. Your support is what makes this channel possible, and your engagement helps these stories reach the people who need to hear them. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. And until next time, stay informed, stay aware, and never stop asking questions.